sort of discussed was the lack of society's understanding of accessibility, and that results in less inclusion, less participation, and less acceptance for people with disabilities and those in the accessibility community. So yeah, just talking about how we can change that so that people are more accepted and can have better quality of life when they have disabilities or are in the accessibility community in some way. So I'll pass it off and we'll talk about the solution that we came up with.
So the solution that we came up with to our problem is sort of a two-pronged approach. So we knew that we wanted to mandate some sort of education to help people get a better feel for the accessibility community, and we want to do that in two ways. The first way that we thought about was a bottom-up approach, so educating the youth. So what we thought the form that might take would be something like a mandatory accessibility training to be completed as a part of the school career and curriculum. Much like now, in order to get your high school diploma, or in order to finish elementary school, you have to finish some EQAO and some OSSLT, some sort of mandatory requirement that requires you to have some accessibility training, and also a top-down approach. So we want to think that every new policymaker at every layer of government would be subjected to some sort of training like this as well. While it may differ slightly in tone, the scope should be very similar. We want to have like a universal understanding gained across the board. We're thinking that training like this would include something like conferences, testimonials, Q&A, like empathy building exercises, as well as just trying out the assistive technologies, because for a lot of people it can be very foreign to them. How we were thinking of doing that? Obviously, for the school, everything has to go through the Ministry of Education, so we would be thinking that the Ministry of Education would be mandating the training through the schools. We would be hoping for a new law that would mandate that politicians and policymakers that I talked about earlier would also be subjected to the training. And then we would definitely need the community support. So we need the community to be on board with this. We don't want, parents to think that the school is overstepping its bounds or something like this. We need everybody to understand that this training is required and beneficial for everyone involved.
So, what is the thought process involved for this? Well, we ended up with about 60 or 70 sticky notes in total, and managed to find an awful lot that related to getting awareness out there in some way, shape, or form. And we noticed too that how we'd like to do it, like the forms of an educational seminar perhaps might be effective. Make everybody disabled for a day, well, that wasn't very feasible, viable. But it's still a possibility that that could be some sort of a form of the education, would be if you wanted to choose to do your training as an individual to learn something about diversity, you could choose to go and associate with some organizations that could help you to know what it feels like to live through the experience of disability in one way or another for a set period of time. We also wanted to be able to, because of the top-down and the bottom-up education, we wanted to be able to affect the change with the policymakers that put in place something that impacts somebody's lives. So one of the things that we could do for training would be to create a system for better patient communication. That could be the outcome of a policymaker knowing how it is that what they did, what they said, what they put in place, how it actually plays out in the end. Their diversity training could be talking to somebody on social assistance or ODSP and seeing how their policy actually impacted their life, right? So that could be their form of education. Also, it's a way to have people stop thinking about the majority needs automatically and start putting their head into the mindset of the people who are in the minority needs for a significant amount of time to understand their situation. And that was the thought process that we had for education.
So next we wanted to talk a little bit what we learned along the route of coming up with our problem as well as a solution. So we realized with some feedback from other groups that confining ourselves exclusively to one sort of solution was going to be far too slow. If we went exclusively with the top-down approach and waited for policy to trickle all the way through society, it's likely that we would see glacial change. The same if we went with just a bottom-up approach. If we have just students being educated when they're in their formative years and need to wait for them to grow up before they can start making policy changes of their own, that would also be too slow. So we learned that the best approach was to be top-down and bottom-up, with a meeting in the middle, ideally much faster than either on their own. We also learned that quantitative feedback on the effectiveness of a measure is difficult, and we feel that education in the manner that we're talking about would be greatly beneficial. So we need better spending and feedback mechanisms on how that is working. Our group was policy and money, but we realized that it was very hard to talk about money without first talking about policy. How do you spend money in a framework where the policy doesn't exist? It's impossible. So we needed to have better insight and understanding before we made the changes and put in the money. When the changes are then made, we would be more able to effectively measure the difference in access we've made from our policy because we have that shared understanding of that increased education brings. Before we start pumping money into the system, we really wanted to let the policy change drive that. Yeah.
So what's next? I think literally it comes down to, first of all, in this room, getting the support of all you. That's where it comes from to start with, but also, talking to our MPPs, talking to our MPs to make those changes, and then with the Ministry of Education, having different meetings with them to talk about the importance of accessibility, and also thinking from the government standpoint that we do have an aging population, so for them to have some type of accessibility training will allow them to look at their policies not only for those with physical disabilities, but for those who are aging. So yeah, it's just getting the support from you guys and moving forward with our politicians and our decision makers in the education system. I think that's all we have for you today, and thank you so much.